Hey, yo, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. This is Smart TCG, and today I'm going to be going over an updated tier list with the brand new set Shrouded Fable out. We most recently saw the Pokemon TCG World Championships recently happen, where Iron Thorns was able to take down the tournament. Another big surprise deck was Roaring Moon, as well as Miraidon as well. Saw quite a bit of success, and that has, shook up the metagame quite a bit. So in this video, we're going to be going over where I think the best decks in the format currently are. With that being said, if you enjoyed the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and let's hop right into it. All right, so hopping into it here, we got a lot of different decks that have been seen play recently. We're going to start off here with Charizard Pidgeot. This is a deck that, pretty much you all know, most likely has been seeing tons of success since its release, and I think currently it is a tier A deck. Still very, very good deck. I think that it is very solid at the moment. Definitely is going to see play and success, especially with the brand new set coming out. It's going to get the brand new card called Briar, so that's going to help that out quite a bit. But as of right now, exactly where we stand with Shrouded Fable being legal, I think it's a tier A deck. Very, very solid. Next up here, we got Gardevoir. Gardevoir is a deck that saw a lot of success at the North American International Championships. However, didn't necessarily see a ton of success at the World Championships. There was one in top 16 and I think one in top 32, but other than that, it didn't necessarily do super well because of its relatively difficult matchup against Regidrago and its matchup versus Charizard not being amazing. So at the moment, I have Gardevoir as currently a tier B deck. It is decent. It's definitely not as good as it used to be, but I still think it's going to show up and see success moving forward. Maybe if all of, like these turbo decks are seeing success at the upcoming Baltimore Regional Championships, then maybe Gardevoir actually sees some success at that tournament simply because Gardevoir does really well against those decks. But the big problem is the Regidrago matchup, and, I think if you can dodge that matchup, you're definitely going to do well. But if you can't dodge that matchup, it might be a little bit of a difficult run for you. Anyways, moving on here, we got Iron Thorns. Iron Thorns is a deck that won the World Championships. Definitely a big surprise to a lot of people. There were plenty in top 32 and top 64 decks saw a lot of success as well. However, one of the biggest problems with this deck is that it can be countered pretty easily. Decks like a Regidrago, for example, they can just play more draw supporters or maybe a second of something like a Canceling Cologne. I think that the matchup versus, Gardevoir is very tough. I think the Charizard matchup is pretty close, but I think this was more a meta call than necessarily a super strong deck. But, it just won the World Championship, so I'm going to give it some credit. I think it's a solid deck. However, moving forward, I definitely expect people to potentially counter it out of the metagame. So you have to be careful, though, with it. It's still decent. Judge can just, pretty much break people. So, you definitely have that going for it. All right, next up here, we got Ancient Box. Ancient Box is a deck that has been getting a lot more talk recently because of how the metagame has been starting to adapt with all of these, turbo two-prize decks like Raging Bolts, like the Miraidons of the world, Turbo Roaring Moon as well. Those are all matchups that Ancient Box does actually very well against. So at the moment, I think Ancient Box is probably the best it's ever been. I think it's, meta right now for it is really good. So I'm actually going to put it in tier A. I don't think it's going to be at the top of tier A once we're done with this video. However, I think it is very respectable, and I definitely think that it has a lot of potential moving forward and is definitely a sleeper pick, in my opinion, heading into the Baltimore Regional Championships. Next up here, we got Turbo Roaring Moon. We got the 3 turbo decks, Miraidon, Raging Bolt, and Turbo Roaring Moon. We're going to kind of just go through all of them right now. I think Turbo Roaring Moon is a tier B deck. I think it's quite solid. I don't think the Regidrago matchup is as good as some people think, just simply because if Regidrago is able to pull off the Kieran play back-to-back turns, they can very easily take 6 prize cards that way, whereas they can't necessarily do that as easily versus decks like Raging Bolt and also Miraidon as well, because of things like Switch Cart and also Bravery Charm being included in those decks, whereas the Turbo Roaring Moon deck doesn't have like those options, to kind of get out of that range. So you have to be very careful. But I think the deck is, pretty solid. I think it's out of the turbo decks the most consistent, and I think that, helps out in some of its matchups. But the Regidrago matchup is not as good as some people say. I think it's a decent deck, though. I think it's definitely going to see play. It's, very solid, and it's pretty much able to achieve its strategy every single game. So overall, it's decent. Next up here, we got Miraidon. I think Miraidon is a tier B deck as well. I think it's above Iron Thorns. I think right below Gardevoir. I would say I don't think its Regidrago matchup is great, you know, simply because it has to find a Gust effect every single time, like versus that matchup. Because it doesn't play Raichu anymore. The majority of lists don't play Raichu at the moment, so having to find Gust every single turn against that matchup can be a little bit stressful. Yes, you do have, you know, something like the Iron Bundle. However, if they get, you know, 2 V-stars up, it can definitely be a little bit shaky. So, like, overall, I think that Miraidon is a decent deck, but isn't, you know, top tier as of right now. It's still good. I definitely, you know, think it's going to see some success, but I don't think it's the best out of the turbo decks at the moment. Last up on some of the Hyper Turbo decks, we got Raging Bolt. I think Raging Bolt is still a very solid deck. I think it's very good as of right now, as it's out of the 3 Turbo decks, I think has the safest matchup versus something like the Regidrago. You don't have to, you know, worry about, you know, matchups like Lugia as much. For example, things like Turbo Roaring Moon can really struggle versus the Lugia matchup because of things, you know, like the Mist Energies. Your matchup versus Charizard, I think, is also okay as well. And I think that it, you know, just overall has the better matchup spread. But the only issue with it is that I think it's slightly more inconsistent. It doesn't hit consistently 280 as much as you would like. I would say it hits it about 60 to 70% of the time on that first turn, which is, you know, like still good. But I think that, you know, decks like the Turbo Roaring Moon do it about 80 to 85% of the time. So I think it's a little bit more of a high roll deck. You need a little bit more to get going. You're a little bit more high maintenance, but I definitely think it is, you know, the strongest, just because I think your Regidrago matchup out of pretty much all the turbo decks is, I would say, the strongest. Next up, we have Lugia. As just mentioned, Lugia is still a deck that I think is, you know, quite good. I think it gets better heading into this tournament. Yes, the Iron Thorns matchup is rough, but if a lot of people tech Iron Thorns out of the format, you do have decent matchups against things like Bolt, Miraidon as well, surprisingly, because of the Legacy Energy and also Turbo Roaring Moon. You do already pretty decently against decks like Charizard and Ancient Box, and you have a good Regidrago matchup as well. So I think that Lugia is still a very, very solid pick as of right now. I'm going to put Lugia all the way right above Charizard, just because where I think the metagame is starting to shape up, I think this deck is going to see a ton of success. Yes, Iron Thorns is a difficult matchup. If you want to help out that matchup, you can play something like a Fluttermane. That definitely does help out. Doesn't necessarily fix the matchup, but it makes it a lot more, you know, doable. But your matchups against some of these other decks are just so good as long as you get going. You know, if this was a deck that was able to consistently play Pokemon setup every single game, then I think that this could, you know, have an argument to be the best deck in the format. However, that's just not necessarily the case. It just has some of those consistency problems, and it's just not able to get going as much as it would like. So overall, I still think it's an incredibly powerful deck as of right now. I think the metagame is really good for it, and I definitely expect it to see success moving forward. This is definitely the time to play Lugia. Despite Iron Thorns doing well, I think this is one of the best times to play the deck. Next up, we have Dragapult. Dragapult, in my opinion, is relatively mediocre at the moment. Definitely not super strong. I think that Regidrago just does what Dragapult wants to do more consistently. And at that point, I don't think there's a reason, if you have the option to play like Regidrago, to play Dragapult over it. So at the moment, it's okay. I don't think it's exceptional. It can definitely win games, like versus some of the stronger decks in the format. But I just think Regidrago does what Dragapult wants to do more consistently, and also has more options. Next up, we have Chen Pao. We did see Lucas Jing get top 16 at the World Championships with it. Ended up also playing, I believe, a 1-1 Palkia, which was kind of the surprising thing. I think the deck is decent. You know, I don't think it's necessarily a top tier deck, but I think it's definitely a very solid deck for sure. I definitely expected to see a little bit more success moving forward. You do take decent matchups against things like Charizard, Lugia as well as pretty solid. And the Regidrago matchup, if you win the coin flip, is decent. However, your matchups against a lot of the turbo decks can be really shaky, because if you go first and you start Chen Pao, then they can just one-shot Chen Pao and pretty much win the prize trade that way, which is not necessarily very good. So there's another problem that you kind of have to deal with, being that your turbo matchups are a little bit shaky. But, you know, fundamentally, I think it's still a pretty decent deck. I'm going to put it actually right below Iron Thorns, just because I want to give Iron Thorns, you know, some respect, just, you know, because it obviously won the championship. So, yeah, at the moment, we'll put that right there. Next up, we got Lost Box Charizard. I think Lost Box Charizard is pretty cool. I believe Marcos Cifuentes, a pretty well-known Latin American player, did see success, I believe, getting top 64 with this deck at the World Championships. I think it's the only Lost Box deck that can beat, I think, Regidrago. So I'm going to give it the respect I think it deserves. I think it's decent. I think it's definitely a little bit better than people I give it credit for. It does really, really well against things like Raging Bolts, you know, Turbo Roaring Moon. You do exceptionally well versus those decks. Also versus Iron Thorns, you just destroy them. So it does have some things going for it. Definitely has some things going for it for sure. But at the moment, I still think Regidrago can be a very scary matchup. You know, being able to pair a Dragapult attack with, you know, like hand disruption is just really scary. So that's something as well to kind of deal with. But anyways, next up, the other Lost Box deck. I'm just going to put in Tier C. They just can't really beat, I think, especially this version, Regidrago consistently. Your Lugia matchup is shaky. Your Charizard matchup's not great. Your Ancient Box matchup is bad as well. It's just not necessarily a very good deck at the moment. So I have it currently in Tier C. Next up, we got Goldengo. Goldengo actually did see some success at the World Championships. I think the highest placing one was a top 64. There was a group from the Seattle, Washington area that ended up playing it, with multiple of them making day 2. The deck's cool. It's fun. I don't think it's the greatest deck in the world. It sometimes feels like more high maintenance Chen Pao, you know, where you just have to hit like more to be able to get like the big, you know, one shots. So it's okay, but I definitely don't think it's the strongest deck, but it is fun. It is very, very fun, and that's what matters for some people. Next up, we got Snorlax Stall. Yeah, Snorlax is probably in the worst spot it's ever been, I think, or at least it's in the worst spot that it's seen in several months, because your matchups against things like Iron Thorns aren't very good. Your Ancient Box matchup, especially if they're playing Petrant, is bad. Your Turbo Roaring Moon matchup is pretty much an auto loss because they play the double Petrant. Your Lugia matchup is bad. Your Charizard Pidgeot matchup as well. If they're playing the 2-1-1 line of something like the Dusknoir, then they can definitely beat you. Your Gardevoir matchup is scary. Your Dragapult matchup stinks a lot of the time. Your Regidrago matchup, which like we're about to go into, doesn't feel very good as well. So in my opinion, I just don't think the deck is very good right now. I think it was a, you know, meta call for the World Championships. Some, you know, top players ended up playing it, but a lot of them didn't see success just based off where the metagame is at. But, you know, if you can hit some players who don't necessarily know how to play versus Snorlax, then I definitely think that you can see some success with it. But the format is just very hostile to it. Next up, we got Regidrago. I'm going to put Regidrago in Tier S. I just think it's the best deck. I think although it has a lot of hate going around for it right now, I think it can pretty much deal with it all. You got things like the Temple of Sinnoh, you know, for the Lugia matchup. Your Charizard matchup is decent. Your Bolt, Turbo Roaring Moon, and also like the Murata matchup. All those matchups are very close, you know, very winnable for sure. I mean, do well against the Lost Zone decks. You beat a lot of also like the random rogue decks as well, just because turn 2 Dragapult is just so powerful. It's just the best deck. It has, in my opinion, the most outplay potential as well. There's definitely a lot of skill involved when it comes to the sequencing with this deck. So yeah, I think it's really good. I definitely think that heading into the upcoming tournaments, you should be thinking about, am I going to play Regidrago or I'm going to play something that beats Regidrago? I think that's the mentality that you should be having. But with that being said, that is going to do it today for the tier list. If you enjoyed the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. And with that being said, this is Smart TCG, and I'll speak with you guys again soon.